Hey guys, Clover B Clover here, and welcome back to another theory. Sorry about last week and not uploading a theory. The two reasons I didn't is one, because I was ill, and two, because I was somewhat out of ideas for theories. Which is why today I'm going to do a theory specifically on Undertale, as I've kind of run out of topics for Deltarune for right now. But if you guys have any topics or ideas that I haven't brought up yet, that you'd like to see my opinion on, leave them in the comments and I might make a theory about that. Other than that, if you guys could subscribe, it would mean the world. I'm already over 800 subscribers, which is insane, as I'm not even half a year into the channel, and I'm already nearly at 1,000. My goal is to get to 1,000 by the end of September, so if I can even get close to that, it would mean a lot. So if you haven't already, subscribe, and without further ado, on with the video. I would like you to remember back to maybe a month ago when the meme of "I'm an Undertale fan, I can't read" really started exploding. Obviously, since then, people started realizing how annoying it is when somebody says doesn't know about one really obscure fact, and then somebody complains that they can't read, as that's just dumb and unnecessary. But obviously, for a while, it was just a funny joke amongst the community. But something I noticed during that time is there was one specific thing within the Undertale community that had that meme used in both directions, and no matter what opinion or side you took, someone would complain that you are wrong. Okay, and here's an example of one of these things happening. There'll be a tweet of someone going, "Oh, I can't believe Frisk would do this in the genocide route. That's just how messed up Frisk is." And also be like, "Oh, that was you, not Frisk," along with the GIF. But on the other side, you would have someone being like, "Oh, I can't believe people still think Frisk is not being controlled by the player, like how Chris is controlled by the player." And then someone saying Frisk isn't controlled by the player in the same way, and you can't read it because it's stated that that isn't a fact. Then obviously, you have more things like this. Some people saying, "Oh, Frisk is a self-insert." Some people saying Frisk and the Soul are two separate characters. People saying Frisk is evil, Frisk is good. Frisk has a personality, Frisk doesn't. All of these sides, no matter which one you take, no matter what opinion you have, there will be someone who tries to tell you you're wrong, no matter what. And that person will have just as many people agreeing with them as people agreeing with you. And it's weird, because I feel like if something as simple as who is the main character of Undertale, there'll be a more general idea or agreement on what's going on with this. And yet, every single time I look, everyone has a different opinion and nobody can agree on it. So I wanted to today take a step back and actually look at what happens in Undertale, devoided from Deltarune, and see if we can figure out what's going on with Frisk within the context of Undertale. Okay, I think a good way of looking at this is to look at the true process route of Undertale from a blind point of view, of someone who has never played Undertale and doesn't know the lore, and see what the game is trying to tell them through the story. As at a certain point, when we know so much about the hidden details of the game, a lot of the direct meanings that we're supposed to know kind of get lost or muddied. A good example of this is in Deltarune, how a lot of people see Death Knight as being a red herring, when in reality, an average player wouldn't know enough about Death to think of Death Knight, and in fact, the Carol Knight theory would be the red herring. But with that out of the way, the game starts with you being told to name the fallen human. Obviously, most people would not go with the name Chara, as they wouldn't know about Chara at this point. So most people would choose the name that they go by, whatever that might be. And then, throughout the game, anytime they die, it will tell their name, whatever name they chose, to wake up. And obviously they play as Frisk, but whenever they're in a battle, Frisk's name is set to their name, so they're just going to assume that the person we're playing as is a blank slate, self-insert character that you would usually find in an RPG. That is very clearly what the game wants you to think for most of the game. However, once you then get to the true lab part of a pacifist run, you'll then find VHSs of a character with the same name as you, who is a human also, but has been dead for ages. Obviously this is meant to stop you questioning on what's actually going on, and then the ending of the game has Frisk tell Azrael, my name is Frisk, and not whatever name you chose. And then Azrael reveals the fact that the person that we chose the name of actually died hundreds of years ago, or years ago. This is very obviously supposed to make us think that the twist here isn't just, oh, the name we chose wasn't us, it was just a random person. The twist is supposed to be the idea that we got a character, a blank slate character, right? Who you see in most games as a main RPG protagonist. And instead of us playing as that blank slate, we got our blank slate taken away from us. And then we got put into, or we got to play as, a completely different character. Obviously, this has a lot of parallels to what happens in Deltarune. I'm not going to focus on that too much, but I think it's just worth to point out. But the whole twist in the pacifist run is the fact the blank slate we thought we were playing as was actually dead for ages, and we were playing as a new human. Which makes even more sense as you think about it, where RPG protagonists are usually like the chosen one, like the first human to enter an area in so long. So, and that applies to Chara, or the first one human, as they were the future of monsterkind. They were the chosen one, they were the first human to fall into the underground. And yet, we don't play as them. We play as the 8th human, which is not a round number, not even an important number, as the important amount of human souls is 7. Well, obviously we are the final human soul they need, but the number 8 has no real meaning for, like, Undertale at all. So we're just playing as a random human who just so happened to be the one to free the underground. Now, this will obviously make someone see Frisk as not a blank slate. I think this fully confirms that Frisk isn't a blank slate character, and is in fact their own character, who we just so happen to control. And also, the fact that we were always given a blank slate character could imply the fact that we are our own entity in some way. But I'll get onto that more in a second. Now, obviously, this isn't the only ways we know that Frisk has their own personality. There's a couple things like, for example, Frisk not liking soda, making it so that Frisk describes soda as some like gross liquid, and also Frisk refusing to let us pick up the soda from the fridge, showing the fact that Frisk, at the very least, has some control over what it is they do. But other than that, I want to talk about what I mentioned earlier, where the twist of the pacifist route is the fact that Chara is our self-insert and is dead for ages. As a lot of people might have pointed out by this point in the comments, that isn't true either. This is then when making theories about this gets very hard, as depending on ending you play, you'll get a different idea for what is actually going on. Because in the pacifist ending, we don't really get any specific characterization of Chara other than the VHSs. So it can be very easily to assume Chara is a stand-in for us, the player. But the moment you do a genocide route, you find out that Chara isn't a stand-in for us, the player. Also, I'd like to point out the fact that while Chara, in my opinion, isn't like the definitive name, as I think the whole point of the naming scene is for us to think we have this character who is self-insert, and the only reason Chara gets like the true name is because all of the human sprites have Chara, which is in them, which is a standard character. But for the sake of just being able to talk about this, I do think Chara is a good overall name for this character, That's just my opinion. And if you think Chara is the correct name for this character, I also do see that as like a very valid reading of what happens. I just also think it's important to remember that most people aren't going to know Chara, and to look at the game from a writing point of view, you have to know that name Chara is less important than whatever name you pick yourself. But moving on from that, in the genocide route, Chara talks to either us or Frisk. It's very hard to tell whether they're making a deal with Frisk or us, the player, as in the passage route, Flowey talks directly to us about letting Frisk live their life. So in the genocide route, we get talked to as either Frisk or the player, and in the passage route, we get talked to as either Chara or the player, which makes it very confusing to figure out which one is true, because for both endings to be just as true as each other, we would have to be our own entity. But at the same time, there isn't enough evidence outside of that to show that we are our own entity, as Frisk seems to pretty much go along with whatever we do, in the same way any other game would do. And that's another interesting point, where a lot of the community seem to think it's either a thing of Frisk is just a blank slate, or Frisk is controlled by the player, and the player is another character, and there's no in between. When at the same time, it could be a thing of like something like Donkey Kong, or like Mario, where the main character is very obviously controlled by us, but the character themselves are their own character who aren't us. We're just like telling them what to do, without it being some weird meta-narrative. Which, while Toby Fox likes meta-narratives, it is very possible that he didn't add a meta-narrative to this very specific thing in Undertale. But, moving on, it's very hard to tell who's talking to who. All that we do know is that Chara can directly call out the player, or whoever, or us at the very least, for doing multiple genocide routes, saying that they no longer understand what our goal is. And also, Flowey can call us out for trying to reset the world and taking away Frisk's happy ending. So at the very least, depending which ending we get told off for making Frisk do bad things. But the reason I'm not going straight for, that means the player is another character, is because in the genocide route, and the passage route, it is somewhat mentioned and confirmed that Frisk enjoys being a bad person. I can't remember exactly where in the passage route this is. If someone can comment and tell me where, but the whole point of the passage route is obviously forgiving people for who they were in the past, or what they've done in the past. And there's a line saying that even we have grown since the beginning of our journey, implying the fact that Frisk, at the beginning of the journey, wasn't this like super kind pacifist that everyone kind of sees him as. And in fact, in the genocide route, we get to see Frisk openly emote about feeling joy whenever a battle starts. Again, I would like to point out the fact that a lot of people see this as Chara taking over, but there is no evidence for that being Chara, like having the smiley face or doing anything. Not even the final slash in the Sans fight is confirmed to be Chara, and it's most likely still Frisk, as Chara doesn't seem to have control over Frisk or us until we sell our soul at the end of the genocide route. So, obviously, Frisk enjoys being a bad person to begin with, but it's only through making these friends that Frisk learns to be a better person. Which then makes it seem that Chara is talking to Frisk, as Frisk and our motives in the genocide route are the same. I think at this point you can see why this becomes such a convoluted topic to talk about, because there's so many different ways to look at this, and each way has just the same amount of evidence proving it as it does disproving it. So, to take a step back for a moment, and to try and actually look at this from a more objective point of view, I'm going to try and disprove the idea that Chara is the one being talked, or actually no, prove the idea that Chara is the one being talked to at the end of a passive run, rather than us the player. Now, the theory I want to put out here is one I'm sure people have pointed out before, but I think for this topic it's very important to bring up, as I think that within Undertale, and within the gameplay of Undertale, we are seeing things from the point of view and perspective of Chara. And obviously, this is directly connected to the whole Chara narrator or curator theory, which, is that how you pronounce that theory name? I've never been able to pronounce it. It's always just really confused me. Curator, I don't really know how to say it. But the Chara narrator theory, the theory that the narrator in Undertale is Chara, has been a popular one for a while, but also has just as many people disagree with it as they agree with it. And I'm gonna try and point out why I think it's true, but instead of doing the same exact arguments that everyone has done before, I'm gonna try and have my own argument on why I think it is, with my own evidence. But if anyone wants just a couple of quick pieces of evidence why this theory might be true, one, whenever you look in the mirror, it says, it's you, it's still you, or it's you, Frisk. And it would be weird for Frisk to be thinking in the third person. Also, in the genocide route, when the text is read, it's very clearly Chara. It's just that it's read to emphasize it more than it is in the normal routes. And then, other than that, the final piece of evidence that people bring up is the fact that during fights against Torio and Asgore, who were Chara's parents, the narration can go silent in, I think, the genocide route, and also in the passage route, the narrator talks about how good parents they are, which, while we could probably gather, I think it would make a lot more sense for Chara, the child of them, to be saying that. But anyway, on to why I personally think Chara is the narrator. Now, is the evidence I'm going to bring up a little bit convoluted and a little bit speculative? Yes, it is, but at the same time, I think it could just be a very interesting way of looking at this, and I think it might actually be a very good way of proving this, and a way that I can't think of anyone disagreeing with. Well, I can, but not really. First of all, the first thing I need to figure out, the first thing I need to prove for this theory to work is when about the game currently takes place. Obviously, when you start the game, it says the year 21X, or sometime in the 2010s. But it has been stated a lot of times within the community that this date, or this year, is actually talking about the date the first human fell into underground, e.g. when Chara fell into underground, not when us the player fell in, or Frisk fell in. This is interesting, because it means we don't actually know when about Undertale takes place. There are still a lot of people who think it takes place in the same decade, or only at most 10 years later, but I think this can be very easily disproven. The first thing we need to do is decide on how long it was since the last human fell into underground. Now, here's where the speculation comes in. I am going to assume that Undyne is around 20, 25, in that young 20s range, young to mid 20s range, as she seems to be a young adult, and she seems to have only really just joined the force, or a bit, as she seems quite recent. And the important thing about this is the fact the only reason she knows about humans, or the only way she knows humans is through anime, as she has no experiences dealing with real humans. Now, I think it's safe to assume that means she has no living memory of a human falling into underground, meaning at the earliest, the last time a human, or the Justice Soul, which would be the last one, last time that soul found the underground, at the very least had to be 20 years before the events of the game, if we're going around 23 for Undying. Obviously, that's give or take 5 years, because if Undying is actually like 25, it would have to be like, it could be 22 at the minimum. Also, it could be way before Undying was spawned. But just for the sake of argument, I'm going with the smallest amount of time that makes sense. So if we have 20 years in between humans falling from the underground, we can now assume that that's like the average amount of time, as we have no other times to really go off. Which means then, we've had, since Chara, we would then have 20 years in the next soul, 20 years, 20 years, 20 years, 20 years, 20 years. So that would be 6 souls, and then 1 more 20 years for us. So that would be, I think, I'm trying to think of how that would be from Chara dying, actually, you could probably remove a bit for Chara dying. So at the very minimum, I would give it 120, 140 range as the speculative amount of time it's been. If I would give my own idea of what time it could be, I would say 100 years. This being because we don't really know how a lot of the humans like fell in the underground. Because for all we know, 2 humans could have fallen in at the same time. 2 humans could have fallen like 5 years or 1 year apart. And all we really know is it has to be at least around 20 years since last human. So I would say 100, but for the sake of this argument, let's say 120, which would then put the events of the game at around what are 2130x. Obviously, give or take a few decades. The reason this is important is because one of the save points, which I will count as narration, the titles of the saves, in Hotland, after Alphys talks about her opinions on the Mew Mew series, Kissy Cutie Mew Mew, I always get the exact title of the anime, but after she talks about it, the next save is called Bad Opinion, or Bad Anime Opinion, like saying that the save point is saying that Alphys had a bad opinion or bad take on the anime. Now you might be going, why does that matter? Why does it matter? Because Frisk could have watched anime just as much as Chara could have watched anime. The reason I bring this up is because of the fact that we know for a fact that Alphys got these animes from the dump, as that's where Alphys finds most of her things, or most of her human things, and we know that Mew Mew is a human show, and when you're in the dump, you can actually find DVDs or like DVD cases for animes. So that implies that Alphys found the DVDs in the dump, and that's how she found the animes. And the reason this is interesting is for 2 reasons. Number 1, DVDs have stopped really being as well used around the 2010s. Obviously, DVDs are still used 10 years later, but to a much... Like, if you look at how much people use DVDs in the early 2000s, early 2010s, compared to now, it's dropped off significantly. And obviously, people still use DVDs in 2020s, but now if you go 100 more years to the future, it'd be very likely that the use of DVDs would keep on dropping down until DVDs are like a thing of the past, in the same way VHSs are, where it's still possible to use them, but you're probably not going to use them. And that's interesting, because it implies that these DVDs would be from around the 2010s, the same time that Chara fell into the underground. Also, it makes sense that DVDs from the 2010s would fall in, because if people stop using them, then obviously they'll throw them away, they become landfill or trash in the ocean, fall down the waterfall into the underground, is how they end up in the dump. Moving on from this, the other reason I think we know it can't be a thing of a modern day DVD is because it is stated in the game that plastic is now a rarity, as the only in the description of the plastic knife, which is implied to have been Chara's at one point. So we know that in the time that we're playing, plastic is very rare is quite rare to be made, and that when Chara was around, plastic wasn't rare to be made, as the knife was made around that time. It would make sense that the DVD cases that are used in plastic would have to be from a time where DVD or plastic was still being in use. Now, why am I saying that the year that the anime was produced is at all important to the who the narrator is? The reason is because we know the narrator has to have strong opinions, or at least opinions on anime, meaning that they've watched it. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't think Frisk, based on all the things we know about them, is the type of person to while they are the type of person to watch anime based on some of their dialogue you can choose for them, I don't think it's likely that they would have watched a anime from around 100 years ago at that point. As it would be like a 9-year-old now watching the original Dracula for fun. Or like a silent movie for fun. It just doesn't really happen. And while not impossible, I think it's more likely that a kid from around the time the kids show was airing would have seen it, rather than someone 100 years later having seen it. Obviously, I think it isn't the strongest piece of evidence for it, but I just found it a very interesting way of looking at Chara, and at Chara being the narrator. Now then, a couple of things about this is, one, this then proves the fact that the person Flowey is talking to is Chara. They are talking to Chara, as for some, I don't know why, but Chara would then have some power to reset. Most likely because Chara seems to have some amount of control over the soul, even if only just a bit, and because of the fact that Frisk has left the underground, it makes sense that Chara now has the power to use to reset, which would also explain how we can reset, even though Frisk is no longer in the underground, and also the fact that Frisk probably doesn't want to reset, and yet still can. But also, the one thing that could prove this wrong is, then how do we see Chara at the end of the genocide route? And I think the explanation from this is the fact that at the end of the genocide route, we end up switching point of views to Frisk, and I think that seeing Chara just floating in the void is actually supposed to be a first-person view of what Frisk is currently seeing, and we are seeing things from Frisk's point of view. Maybe it's because that's what Chara's saying, because Chara's still like connected to soul, but now has a physical form. Or maybe there is some player stuff going on, but that does then mean that Chara will be directly looking at Frisk, meaning that Frisk is the one being spoken to by Chara. Also explaining why Frisk does show the same interest and point of view as us during the genocide group. If Frisk was supposed to be controlled by the player, because Frisk isn't controlled by a player, they're just doing what they want to do, basically. So, what this really means is that Frisk is free. Frisk is not controlled by the player. And while it is always a fun concept for like fan stuff, to see that whole idea of Frisk being too young to understand what's going on, or Frisk thinking like that's what like head trauma's like, what happens in Undertale, like that is I can't remember which comic that's from, but that was a very funny idea. But looking at all the evidence, I genuinely do just think the player and Frisk are both on. It's like the player is controlling Frisk. It's just a thing of that isn't a meta thing. It's just the players playing as a character, but we are looking for the point of view of the character who shares stuff with us. Because Chara obviously shares a name with us most of the time, and also can share the same interests as us. As during a genocide route for the first time, they share our goal, and during a passage route, it is implied that Chara does go under some amount of character development, where Chara then decides that maybe it's a good thing we spare people. Also, Chara being the narrator does explain why sometimes Chara can just lie about what Frisk is doing. Within the True Lab, Frisk sometimes tells Chara by saying that's not what's happening. As the narrator goes, oh, you're laughing, you can't stop laughing. Wait, what do you mean you're not laughing? As if Frisk was directly telling Chara that that's not what's happening. But anyway, that's just my take on the whole player Frisk Chara situation. The player Frisk Chara situation is crazy, but I don't know. I've always found it very interesting that nobody can agree. So I thought I would just give all my point of views on this situation, on how the characters interact. And if you enjoyed, again, subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. If you disagree with anything or you have anything to add to my points, then just leave a comment. I try to respond to any theory comments as well as I can. So if you have your own theory to explain stuff, or you have more evidence for my theory, or you have evidence against my theory, just leave a comment explaining your idea, and I'll try and get around to it as soon as I can, and give my point of view to your idea. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.